Hello and welcome to this first webinar in the series of the Physiology of Exercise. I'm Norman Blissett and I'm going to be introducing the webinar and asking some questions along the way. I'm the director of Gallanach. Gallanach is a consulting advisory firm consisting of senior managers and board directors working with small, medium organisations, not-for-profit and public sector organisations. We've got many years of hands-on practical experience of leading organisations, boards and teams to improve performance through strategic insight and practical evidence-based solutions. So we're proud to be collaborating with Sunsport Velo in organising this first in this series of webinars. And I'm joined by Stuart, who you can see on the video, Stuart Percival, who's the head coach of Sunsport Velo women's racing team and the Sunsport Velo Performance Hub. So before we get into the main detail of the webinar tonight, Sunsport Velo women's racing teams had a lot of TV appearance time over the last couple of weeks with the Tour de Yorkshire and the Matrix Fitness Grand Prix series. Stuart, what's your experience been like, especially lining up alongside former world champion Lizzie Deignan and Olympic champions Katie Archibald and Anna van der Breggen? It must have been fantastic to be a part of that.
Yeah, it's been a fantastic experience. Hectic to say the least. I was only on the phone 5 minutes ago, arranging the logistics for tomorrow's Matrix Series round down in Wembley. So we're all over the country racing really hard. A fantastic team who are out there, like you say, racing against some of the world's best riders at elite level in the UK and hopefully outside the UK later in the year. So yeah, it's really exciting but challenging to manage, and and something that's related in some way to what we're going to be talking about this evening. It's all to do with performance and trying to get this team to the highest level. Short time. Hopefully we'll get a bit of we'll do that this evening. So yeah, it's good.
Okay, well, good luck with the rest of the series, and you can see highlights of the events, the races on ITV4. On I think they're 7 p.m. aren't they? In
Yeah.
evenings. Okay, we're kicking off or should I say, in the cycling parlance, clipping in our webinar series with an introduction to the physiology of how your body powers the bike and how state-of-the-art technology can pinpoint specific training to help you get faster on the bike. So Stuart's going to tell us a bit more about himself and then get straight into the main part of the webinar, and I'll come back in at the end for the discussion. So over to you, Stuart.
Okay, thanks Norman, and thanks for hosting this hosting us this evening and agreeing to work with us on this series of webinars to hopefully introduce athletes and coaches to perhaps some new thoughts and ways of working and assessing and coaching athletes. So it's going to be hopefully an exciting series, and this is just the first in one of many, hopefully. So we're just going to introduce ourselves and what we intend to do over the coming weeks, and tonight should be a good into what we're doing here in Manchester and what we're hopefully going to be doing in the future. So as Norman already said, I'm Stuart Percival, head coach of Sunsport Coaching, which is an athlete performance coaching business. We're based down here in Manchester, where we have our sports physiology lab. It's here that we offer a comprehensive portfolio of performance testing assessments for athletes. We work with many athletes, endurance athletes, so cyclists, runners, triathletes, duathletes, rowers most recently, so assessed a rower. So across many sports, and we see athletes from all over the UK, and we coach athletes from inside the UK and also worldwide. So and as Norma mentioned, we recently have our elite women's race team as well. So we're quite experienced, and we get to test and assess lots of athletes. So we're continually challenged by them, and we want to be the best and get them to the best. So we have to continually sort of move with the times and be forward thinking, and that's what we're trying to do here in Manchester. And that's what this webinar is about, really, is to just hopefully introduce these new concepts and ideas, so maybe we just change the way people view how they assess athletes and how athletes actually train. And that's what it's all about. So we work with athletes. So all the work we've done in the field and some of the new equipment we've just taken over the last year or so has helped us to come up with some new assessment protocols and get a really good new insight into physiology. So we want to change the approach people are having. It's really allowed us to dial into individual athletes' physiology and make some really quite unique training interventions. We're having some fantastic results with it. And it's basically all about the new technology we're using and the way we assess and actually train in real time. I think most people are familiar with wearable technology now. So if you think of small devices that you can attach to athletes and see in real time what's actually happening in specific areas of the body. So that's generally what we're doing and what we're going to introduce this evening. So yeah, we're kind of trying to get that direct biofeedback from the body. Sounds a little complex, but it's not. We're going to explain exactly how we do that. So I'll give you some real world examples as we go along. So for example, when we use this new technology and these new methods, maybe in the past, for example, we'll talk cycling because that's the main focus of this evening. We may have perhaps we know how important technique is, for example, for a cyclist. So we would perhaps previously prescribe some fairly generic um, technique-based sessions because we know in the lab when we test an athlete that if the technique is not as good as it should be, then performance is going to have a direct impact on performance because we see we use much more energy for a given effort. So now, whereas in the past we would say, okay, we need to improve technique because it's probably going to improve performance, and we would only be able to quantify that in the lab. Now we can actually attach some of these wearable devices and come up, and start to see exactly how certain parts of the body are functioning, and then give them some quite specific intervention. So whereas we would have set some fairly generic technique-based sessions, we may, for example, ask a cyclist to go strengthening a certain muscle in the gym, or even perhaps improving some flexibility in a certain muscle. Or when they're on the bike, rather than just doing some simple cadence techniques, they may wear one of these devices or try some different types of pedaling styles, and we can see real time what effect that has on performance. So yeah, so it's really exciting time for us, and that's what this webinar series is designed for, really, to show athletes and coaches some of the theory and how we achieve this, and hopefully change the way we approach performance assessment and coaching in the future. That's certainly what we're doing in Manchester, and hopefully that's other people to do that. So I think to start with, if we just go back and just talk quickly about some traditional methods so everybody understands where we're coming from and what changes we're making. So traditionally, how would we track performance and training? So I think most people do any sport and coach or self-coach or have a coach are familiar with the types of computers and things we would have. So most people would, or coaches would prescribe, or athletes would control sessions using GPS, speed, heart rate, those sorts of things. Because it's a cycling related webinar tonight, we'll talk a bit more about maybe power meters. So over the last 5 years, we've seen a big spike in the number of athletes, amateur athletes we coach with power meters. So we have all this kit, these bike computers, wristwatches, phone apps that give you all this data, huge amounts of data. But power meters have been particularly taken off, and they've been really useful for us to help coach athletes. But they've been around for almost 10 years now, and they've created some great training concepts as well. So I think functional threshold power, for example, most people have got a bike or read cycling magazines or got a power meter or friend have heard of functional threshold power. That's not the focus of tonight's webinar. What it's the point I'm making is great concept, lots of data. But we feel, particularly Sunsport coach in Manchester, that the focus, because of all this technology or previously, it's been more on kind of output than input. So I'll just briefly explain what I'm talking about there. So output, if we keep it in a cycling context, output. So we talk about power meters. They really accurately measure the rate of work done. That's what a power meter does. So how much power you can produce the athlete can produce in a certain amount of time. So it's a direct measure of performance. So a great piece of kit. We use it now. We've used it, and we're not saying we're not going to use it in the future. That's not the point of this webinar, to say don't use certain things. Fantastic piece of training, measuring output. So let's give you an example of what I'm talking about in a cycling context. So if we say a cyclist doing a time trial, so they're going to ride from point A to point B, and the idea, the time trial, is to cover that distance in the shortest time possible. So the power meter would be a great way of controlling that effort and getting the best time possible. So if a cyclist rode from A to B and got a certain time, there would be a certain hour associated with that at the end of it. If we could repeat that same experimental race, all of the variables the same, so the weather, temperature, tyre pressure, the cyclist position on the bike. We couldn't actually do this, but let's just say, for argument's sake, we could. And then the athlete went and rode the same distance A to B and covered that distance in a shorter amount of time, then that's a good thing. And most likely, if everything else is equal, we would have produced more, or the athlete would have produced more power to do that, which is great. But we don't, all we have then is just the distance he's travelled and the power that he's produced to do that. So we have this output data. We don't have any understanding as to how he's actually achieved that, how it was achieved. So, and it's not always the case that the athlete improves. They may go slower. So then disappointment associated with that. So why, if everything's the same, is the athlete now getting from A to B in a slower time with less power? Or the other thing is, maybe they have a good week and then maybe next week not so good. So times are sometimes faster, sometimes slower, powers up, powers down. So the power meter is a great tool for quantifying the output, and we've coached many athletes successfully with power meters. It gives us no physiological feedback on how they produce that power. So we have lots of information missing, which from a coaching point of view is a big problem. They're going to improve the athlete's performance. So that's kind of great, lots of data. It's all output data. It doesn't really help us understand what's going on inside this athlete. So then we would have input data. So that historically would always be measured in the lab. So think of things like blood lactate, VO2, oxygen uptake, these sorts of things. So that gives us a good insight into the athlete's internal physiology. And we generally historically been done in the lab, because we would be able to really control the environment, nice sterile environment, really control the protocol, take all the other variables out of it. So you get lots of useful data. It's very clean data. And the problem you have then is it doesn't always transfer to performance out in the field. So great in the lab. A little bit of confusion as to why that athlete's not performing great on the road. So we have lab data, road performance data, and then lots of missing information in the middle. So ideally, we'd like to have the lab attached to the athlete most of the time, but that's not really been achievable in the past, because the equipment's generally large, not very portable. So we have these two lots of great data, and we need to kind of bring it all together. So input in the field has generally historically been heart rate based. So I think everyone's familiar with heart rate. Put these straps on, even watches give you heart rate now. So I think most people who have a power meter double it up with a heart rate strap, and then you're starting to get an insight into some input. So you're produce this amount of power, and you have this relationship with heart rate. So that would be the best kind of thing you could do up till this point, to understand how much physiological effort your body's making to produce that power. But again, from a sports science point of view, still a huge amount of information missing. So, so that's where we are. So we're working hard at Sunsport Coaching in Manchester to pinpoint and really dial into athletes' physiology and understand what their limiters are, make some unique training interventions, and be able to track this and control this in the field. So that's what we're doing, and that's what the webinar is about today. Really is giving you a basic understanding of how we do that, showing you a little bit of live physiology assessment, and then in the future webinars to really sort of focusing on certain areas. So just going to flip it over to PowerPoint now. Norman, if you can do that, yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, good. So we're just going to basically in order to set the scene for future webinars, you just need to get some basic physiology understanding. So just wait for this to connect here. So just while we're waiting, I'll just talk through this. So before we demonstrate some of the things and some of the equipment we're going to use, we really need to just introduce some basic physiology. So what happens to the body during exercise, some really basic concepts, how we make some performance improving interventions. With us here, I'll connection. Should we try and share that again, Norman, or is it?
Okay, let me come out of it. Sorry, folks. Sometimes we can have a few technical problems. What we seem to be having at the moment. There we go. Let me just try again. Oh, that's sorry. Right.
Try again.
Do you want to try that?
Yep. Good.
Oh, there we go. Yep.
Okay, yep. So so let's just as I was saying there, sorry about that technical issue. So before we get ahead of ours and start looking at the equipment and the way we do this, we just need to introduce some basic physiology concepts so everybody understands what we're talking about. So for the purpose of this webinar, let's just think of an athlete physiology as being made up of a team of four. So I just want to introduce three concepts here. We have this team of four, which we'll talk about in a moment. Then we have something we term balance when we're talking to athletes. Most people will be more familiar with perhaps homeostasis. Back to school, we speak a lot about that in school. And then limiters and compensators. So you have this team of four, balance, homeostasis, and then limiters and compensators. And I'll explain what I mean by that, because this is kind of fundamental to it. So our team of four here, so I'll just use my arrow. So we have the brain, obviously, at the top here. So we term this the central governor, if you like. And we have the heart here. So this is the cardiovascular system. So not just the heart, it's the delivery system, the vessels that come off the heart. Then we have the respiratory system here. So again, not just the lungs, also the respiratory muscles and the ribs around that, because that really affects performance as well. And then the actual muscles. So here we've got again a bike, because it's a cycling related webinar this evening, but really we're talking about the main muscles that the athlete is using to exercise. So that's more interested in. So if it was somebody on a rowing machine, we would be more interested in different muscles. So this is the team of 4, okay? And this is an important concept because this is how we approach assessing an athlete. So the body is continually subjected to changing internal, external environments, and our physiology is in a very careful balance. It's in a very balanced state, and we need to maintain that balance at all times. So this is what this team of 4 do basically. The brain's kind of in charge, and then the other members of the team continually make changes inside the body to maintain balance. So let me give you an example again, so we understand what I'm talking about. Nothing to do with exercise, just simple temperature, for example. So if we are in an extreme cold situation, cold environment, then I think everybody knows what happens. Generally you will start to get cold, and then you lose the sensation in your fingers and your toes and your nose. And what's happening there is because the body needs to stay in a really tight range of temperature. The brain, this team of 4, the brain at the top there, really needs to do something very quickly. Okay, otherwise we're going to be in a critical state that induces to life. So we start to close down those vessels on the outside because the fingers and the toes all over are very important. They're not as important as, say, the heart and the brain. So all that water is redirected to the important area to continue to obstacle survival. And then hopefully you will take yourself out of that environment and warm up, and no problem. Or then the other end of the, if we're in a really hot environment, so if we walked into a sauna, then we would get very hot very quickly, and again we would initially go out of this balanced state, this tight temperature range that we would have, and we'd have to do something about it very quickly, otherwise we would have problems very quickly. We'd get heat stroke, we'd maybe go unconscious, then we'd go into coma. So what do we do? So we do kind of the opposite. We would get sweaty, we would get very red, our vessels would dilate, and then we would try to offload that heat as quickly as possible. And then again, you would hope you would get yourself out of that situation, and then it would be much easier for the body to manage and bring yourself back into balance. So that's the team of 4, and that's the second concept of balance and homeostasis. It's a continual battle the body is going through all the time, every day, every minute of the day, all these different things coming at it, and it's continually keeping you in balance. And that's what happens in a healthy person. Now, I think most people understand that, even though they probably don't sit down and think about it because they're not sports scientists or nerds or whatever. So I think what most people don't realise, or I'm pretty sure they don't, from the conversations we have in the lab, is that actually exercise is no different. So when we start exercising, we stress the body in exactly the same way, and we create a problem for the body. It has to do something about it. Otherwise, we have to stop exercising because we get out of balance, and it's not safe and healthy to do that. So as sports scientists, we're really interested in how we manage this balance, but more specifically, we control the balance, the reason for that. And that's really important because that takes us into our kind of third thing to know, which is limiters and compensators. So if this is our team of 4, the brain, the heart, the lungs, and muscles, they're all working during exercise to keep us in balance, homeostasis. We all know that that's not possible all the time because we stop, we get fatigued, then we have what we term limiters and compensators. So the first thing we're looking for is, where do we lose that balance, because that is limiting this athlete's performance. So that's fairly easy to do with the equipment we've got and the expertise. The next thing we need to know is, at the point we lose balance, what's the reason for that? So which one of this team, the weak link, if you like. So we may see it's a cardiovascular limitation or a respiratory limitation. So we're looking for the limiter in the athlete. So it'd be one of these systems that's and we can now do that with our new approaches and our new equipment. And once we know who the limiter is, then we can make some really unique training interventions to improve that performance of that limiter. And the compensators are basically one or more of the other systems that take once that system hits its limit. That's how we continue exercising even beyond that limiter, but ultimately it will lead to fatigue. So we need to find that limiter and move the performance of it. So that's really, hopefully makes sense, and we really want to sort of get that across, because the future webinars and the rest of this one are all about that really. And really, in exercise terms, back to the temperature analogy, in exercise terms, it's all about the delivery and the utilisation of oxygen. So that is more or less, and the removal of the waste products of exercise. That's really what we're trying to determine. Is the point we lose the ability to maintain the delivery and uptake of oxygen. That's, without oversimplifying it too much, that's more or less what we're looking for in all our, all these systems work together to deliver and use oxygen in the muscles. So that's pretty much in its simplest term what we're looking for, because that's all that leads to fatigue. So that's important for the rest of the webinar. So now I think so we've got this team of 4, we've got this balance, and we've got limiters and compensators. So it's great. Okay, how do we do that? How do we know about this? So now we have obviously some equipment that I've just introduced to you, which allows us to measure each of this. So think back to this team of 4 again. So we want to measure the cardiovascular system, we want to measure the respiratory system, we want to measure the muscles. Because without measuring them, we're not going to be able to see who's potentially the limiting factor. So we have some equipment here. So I'm going to just put that on the screen. Okay, so okay, Norman, what can you see there now? Okay, so sorry about that. So I'm not sure what you can see right now. I'm going to introduce some of the equipment anyway that we would use to test the athletes. So we've already. So if we think of the members of the team, so we have cardiovascular, the heart, the lungs, the muscles. So we've already spoken about heart rate. So when we're in the lab, we would use heart rate on an athlete, and we don't actually use the belt in the lab actually. We would use a pulse oximeter. So if I put that on my finger, so here we have pulse oximeter, and this would measure arterial oxygen saturation and heart rate. So see those values there. We don't actually use a finger in the lab. We would have a probe on the athlete's ear. So these 2 things would give us information about heart rate and during the test. Then we have have VO2 equipment. So this is a hands-off mask, and we would want to get the athlete to wear this. That's good during the test. So when we're assessing the athlete, they would have this over there, and you'll see some video of this over their face, and this gives us all the information that we need. It gives us a huge amount of data, but what we're actually interested in terms of this webinar is how that athlete's respiratory system is functioning. So basically, how many breaths they're taking, depth of breathing, the volume of air they're moving, oxygen and CO2, and all these things. This tells us how well the respiratory system is working. And we would attach a flow sensor on there, and you'll see this in the video, and some tubing, and then this is all linked to a box that records all this, and you'll see that data live shortly. So that tells us everything about the athlete's breathing. And then we have some fantastic wearable technology. So we have these small surface EMG. So this measures muscle activity. So we can put that on an athlete's muscle. We're not going to show this today. This is a future webinar. And then we get to see muscle activity during exercise. So for example, in a cyclist, we have a whole load of, we would attach them to the cyclist's legs, and we would be able to see which muscles he was activating, how much force he was putting through them. So we start to get a picture of maybe, does he use the left leg more than the right leg? Does he use certain muscles in one leg more than? So that's really interesting. So think back to that team of 4. We're now starting to look at muscle activity with this. And then perhaps the star of the show is our Moxie monitors. So I'll just show these to you. Fantastic piece of kit. This is perhaps what's stimulated us to do what we're doing here today. So we have a few of these in the lab, and we can attach them to athletes. And these are small wearable sensors that utilise near infrared spectroscopy, infrared light basically, that shines into the athlete's muscles and gives us real-time muscle oxygen saturation, which we'll talk about later as we get into the webinar. And basically, these are very similar to the surface EMG. We would put these on muscle, and we'll show you a picture of this shortly. So attached to the muscle, and this gives us real-time data on whichever muscle we choose. So we choose primary muscles that athlete is using for that exercise. So again, cycling, these on the legs, and one on the arm, probably explain later why. So we have this fantastic team of 4, and we can now measure everything. So we use all this data, so we have all this equipment, and bring it all together. So I think time we moved on to actually looking at some data an athlete actually my screen. So okay, so we have a video here. So before we look at exercise data, we always should look at resting data. So that'll give you a good idea of actually what happens at rest, and then you can see the difference of what happens when they're exercising. So I'll just go and then you can just watch it. So we have an athlete here who is attached to the mask that I showed previously. So here we have the mask on his face, so we're collecting all the data, all the respiratory gases that come out of his mouth. So we can start to see how many times he's breathing, what mix of gases are in, so how much oxygen and CO2 is in there, is expired air, how many breaths he's taking, and the volume of air he's moving. This is really important for us because, again, think back to that team of 4 respiratory system. So we're looking for limitation, aren't we? So it potentially could have could be the respiratory system that's limiting performance. So to give an example how that might happen, let's say, for example, he has a respiratory limitation. It could be something as simple as his position on a time trial bike, for example, because he's got such an aggressive style. Maybe he can't expand and relax his chest properly and actually get that CO2 out and that oxygen in. So actually, his limitation will show as a respiratory limitation, but actually it's because of his position on the bike as opposed to his own physiology. So we would see a respiratory limitation, and then we would obviously through analysis try to figure out why, and maybe actually that this guy is just in aggressive position which isn't allowing him to breathe properly. Or we sometimes see athletes who've got previous injuries, so they may have broken some ribs or a collarbone, and actually they have a similar problem. They can't get enough movement in the chest to get enough oxygen in or CO2 out. So again, they've got a respiratory limitation that's down to perhaps an old injury. And so these are the sort of things we're looking for with all this equipment. So we have them hooked up, and this tubing goes to a machine and tells us all this information about how they're breathing. So let's just take a look here. So if we just pause the video there, so my finger's on the screen, apologies, but what we've got here is basically, let's just have a look at some live data here. So this athlete here is at rest on the bed doing nothing, basically breathing here 12 times a minute, and he's moving approximately 700 mils or 0.7 litres of air in and out of his lungs with each breath. So you can see real time him breathing, and the values change slightly, but he's at rest. So think back to that. Think back to the previous slide. We've got this team of 4. We're nicely balanced. We've got homeostasis, no problems whatsoever. And to maintain homeostasis, that balance, this athlete is just breathing 12 times a minute and is moving about 700 mils of air in. Unless we ask him to do anything else, nothing's really going to change. He just relaxed, breathing nicely. And we'll just pause it there because I have some more data here. So they have volume. This is how much oxygen and carbon dioxide is in his respiratory gases. So we can see very low levels because he's relaxed. He's not using a whole lot. He's not using fuel. So nice balance, resting balance. So if we ask him to do something, nothing's really going to change. So this is how we're measuring that kind of respiratory side of that team of 4. So we'll come back to that athlete later on and just see how exercise impacts on those variables. So now if we look at some live muscle data, if you think back to the MOXes we had here, so I have the MOXie here, so we have 3 of these. Because it's cycling related today, we just showed you where we're going to place them. So we choose some of the prime locomotor muscles that the athlete would use for his sport. So in finding out what limits this athlete's performance. So we need to look at the muscles that are very active during their specific sport. So with cycling, we're obviously really focused on the legs, but not just necessarily the legs, but that would be where we would start with the initial assessment. Start with the legs, see what results we get, and then we may go further afield. So this would be a classic place to use our MOXes. So I show you here. These are the leg muscles. This leg muscle here would be the big one across the front, the rectus femoris, the vastus lateralis at the side. So if we look down to the bottom left, this is where we place the MOXie on that one muscle. So that is giving us live biofeedback, live muscle oxygen data from that middle. And then we would also one on the side, and then we stick them down. So you see them here attached. And then we also put one on the arm as well. We try to use a non-involved muscle. And, we'll talk about this more in future webinars, but to sort of control. So we can, the ones on the leg muscles give us direct local feedback. We put them on a muscle that's less involved, and if that starts to give us some interesting data, then we start to see that actually it's maybe a systemic problem rather than a local. So we'd attach 3 MOXes on the athlete. So let's just have a little look here at some resting data from those MOXie monitors. So I'll just here and just just familiarise with yourselves with the screen here. So what I'm interested in here is this value here, the green ones basically, this one here. So we have basically, these are the 3 MOXie monitors, so these little sensors on the athlete. So this top one here is the one on the front of the leg, on on the rectus femoris. This value here is the muscle at the side, the vastus lateralis, and then the bottom is the arm. So obviously the top two are on the very active muscles. So when he starts cycling, we're going to see exactly what happens in the leg, and we shouldn't see a whole lot happening in the shoulder. And if we do, we'll explain as well to see that. So that's what we're going to do. And you can see real time now. So we'll start the video. The athlete, don't forget, is just sat on the reclined on the couch doing nothing. So really high levels of oxygen saturation, nothing's really happening. The values aren't changing a great deal. And then another point to show you here is it's just coming to the screen here. So heart rate here. So heart rate very low, 57. So it's resting. He's resting at the moment. So he's got a low heart rate, and his oxygen levels in those muscles rested in are very high. So plenty of oxygen and low heart rate. So think back to that balance, that team of four. We're nice and balanced at the minute. We don't have a problem with oxygen delivery or uptake. So no stress for this athlete at the moment. So that's what we're going to measure during exercise. So we've got the mask on, we've got the moxies on the legs. We'll just look at all this data when we start. So here we go to perhaps our first video here. So again, let's just familiarise ourselves with the screen before we start to see what happens. Just think back to that first slide as well. What we're trying to see here is this team of three. Is the governor, the central governor, if you like. This team of three working together to maintain balance and prevent sort of loss of homeostasis. So this is what we're trying to do here. So here's our assessment screen. This is the test the athlete is going to go through. So these blue squares are basically to test. This is the power output the cyclist is going to ride at, and these are 5-minute intervals. This is a special test that we've designed and come up with that we think is a great way of assessing this athlete's physiology, so we can see how he responds to different loads when he starts to lose balance, and then most critically, why he's losing balance. So who's the limiter? Is it the cardiovascular system? Is it the respiratory system? Is it the muscles themselves? So let's start the video. So this athlete is actually now sat on the bike, but not pedaling. So we're just taking 1 minute of, we'll say resting, not completely resting data. So again, let's just have a quick look at what we've got here. So if we think back to when we looked at the athlete with the mask on and he was just resting, if we look here, so we have down at the bottom right, resting respiratory, some respiratory data. So now he's sat upright, he's breathing slightly higher. He's taking 18 breaths a minute. It was 12 when he was laying on the couch. So simply just sitting up on the bike, and probably anticipation of starting has just raised his respiratory rate slightly. And he's moving at about 800 mils or 0.8 litres of air per breath. So slightly higher than before, but still very low and very balanced. And we see here slightly higher oxygen and slightly higher carbon dioxide. And still very low at 59. So we're watching more video. So this is we can get a huge amount of data from this machine, but at the moment, think of that team of four. We're interested in the respiratory system. So how much air, how the respiratory system deals with exercise. So we're going to, very shortly, we're going to ask this athlete to start pedaling. So he's 1 minute of just sitting on the bike. We're going to ask him to start pedaling. The reason why we don't give him a warm-up is because we're going to immediately create a big problem for this athlete, because he's going to go from resting to pedaling certain power output without a warm up, we are going to create a problem by disrupting that homeostasis, and his body will have to deal with that very quickly, and that's just normally what happens with exercise. So in a moment, go down to look at the MOXes, so we can just capture this resting data before we start pedaling. So you should just scan down in a second. So we're going to start pedaling in a minute. Okay, so the athlete has now just started pedaling. So notice the heart rate increasing. Let's just pause it there. So notice the heart rate here. We've gone from 59 to 78 within 10 seconds, okay? Breathing rate has started to go up 17 to 20 and is now moving almost twice as much air in and out of his lungs per breath. So something's happening quite quickly, and we just need to understand what's happening here. So just keep it cooling for a moment long. Heart rate is now 90. Heart rate is almost twice this. He's now breathing 25 times, twice as often as when he was lay on the couch and resting. Okay, so what's actually happening here? Okay, and here's the first indication of why that's happening. So historically, we've just had the data from the above screen. Now we can see real time something quite significant is happening in the legs. So we've gone back down to the MOXie screen now. So back to what we're looking at here. So this top screen here, this top green box, is the oxygen saturation in one of the muscles in the legs. This is the second one in the legs, and this is the shoulder. So you can see he's now pedaling. The legs started to use a lot more oxygen. So these oxygen, so we've now lost that balance in the legs. We've got a problem. We haven't got as much oxygen in the legs, and we need to sort that problem out quickly. Otherwise, we're going to have to stop pedaling the bike. So that team of 4 now has just kicked into action, and it's trying to bring the body quickly back into action. So if we just see, so here we go. So here's a good, so heart rate is now 96 up here. So in order to bring that balance back, we need to get more oxygen to the legs. So this is what I was talking about before, and it's about oxygen delivery and uptake. So start the athlete off, we get the oxygen level because we've got a resting heart rate and a low respiratory rate isn't delivering enough oxygen. So we create a big problem straight away, and the athlete's body has to deal with it. And at this low intensity, that's what's the problem. You give this athlete 2 or 3 minutes, and they will get to a balanced state. Well, most of them would. So we would see that, and we'll go into that in a moment. It takes a little time to get to steady state and get that balance back. But you can already see as we're closing on this video that the athlete is starting to level off at about 100 heart rate, 105, and his initial breathing slowed down to about 19, 2 litres. So take this forward a little bit. So before we start this video, let's just have a look at the data as we move forward here. You can see this in here is what we call the alarm phase. So this steep line here is what we call the alarm phase. So we've created a loss of balance in body, and we do that on purpose because we want to see how this athlete tolerates. Can they get that balance? And normally, certainly yes, at that first stage, because we wouldn't want them to not go further into the test. So but even at this initial stage, we start to see how those team members work together to bring that balance back. So we can see here, 3 or 4 minutes in, we've gone from an alarm phase to being back in balance. So to balance the body back out, we can't do that at heart rate. 59 and a breathing rate of 12, the heart has to work harder, so does the respiratory system, and the muscles have to be able to take more oxygen up. So let's just have a look here. So we'll start the video again. So this athlete has now been cycled for 4 minutes at 130 watts and he's regained balance. So those 4 team members have come together, created a situation where we're back in balance. Now to do that requires a much higher heart rate, a much higher breathing rate, muscles to be working and taking oxygen up. And that's generally what happens all throughout exercise. So it's, continual changes in intensity, losing balance, quickly bringing balance back together. And you see here, so we've now stopped the athlete, and the reason we stop the athlete, I'll just stop the video there, is because we also want to see, as we stop and start very quickly, we get to see how those team members work together, and in later webinars, we'll start to understand actually, once we've identified the athlete's limiter, how we start to understand who that. Sorry, when we identify the point the athlete reaches its limit, the state where they're no longer in balance, we can use these breaks in the assessment, to really dial into which one of that team of 4 is the limiter. So we'll talk about that later on. So if we stop now, you can see, I'll just pause the screen slightly. So if you watch the heart rate here in the top left, and you watch the muscle oxygen saturation, you will see the athlete has now stopped pedaling, so the opposite of when he started. So again, we need to regain balance, but we're going the opposite way this time. So heart rate is dropping very quickly, and you can see the reason for this, because oxygen saturation in the muscles of the legs is now going up. So we now no longer have this problem with oxygen, high oxygen usage. So because oxygen is being replaced in the legs where it's stored in the myoglobin, then heart rate, so the central governor of the brain thinks, okay, I don't need a heart rate of 110, the legs aren't moving and using oxygen. So we go through this process, stopping and starting the athlete, different intensities to see at what point lose that balance and which member of the team is the limiter. So, and you can see here, okay, the athlete has just started pedaling again. So we'll see real time now. Heart rate will start to go up here, top right hand side, and you'll see the reason for that is because the first slide, oxygen delivery and utilisation, oxygen is being used very, very quickly in these leg muscles. And if we get to a state where it gets too low, that becomes critical problem for the body. Stops exercising, it's not safe. So to compensate for that, we have increased heart rate, increased breathing rate, and then we can continue to exercise and that's how the body notice. So here we go again. So this is after the 1 minute break, we start the second load, still at 130 watts. Same thing again. So we get this alarm phase. So we've gone from resting to knocking the athlete out of balance, creating a big problem. Physiology has to, that team of 4 has to come together very quickly and do some balance, otherwise it's simply to stop pedaling without. And that's the process we're going through. And we have to measure all these things to start to determine. Back down to the moxies. Again, rest, we're up at 70 when we're active. This is a very low intensity for this athlete, so we've got much more capacity to exercise. Even at these low intensities, you see really big changes in balance and how the team work together. That's why we interrupt the load, and that's the protocol that we've designed and we use. So and we're going to go on much further into tests. So the beginning of the end, ominous. So I think you know what's going to happen here. So we can see before we start the video, we can see the loads the athlete's gone through. So these are 5-minute blocks. So he's been working quite a long time. He's been cycling for 40 minutes, and we're starting to see things change. So we've gone through this process of asking the athlete to pedal, create a problem. Can that team of 4 deal with the problem and get that balance back in the early stages? Yes, it can. Now we're getting to the point where actually, no, we can't get that balance back. So why can't we get that balance? Because we've hit one of the team of 4 hit its limit. So we're at that limit. So heart rate much higher now, 169. Heart rate, the cardiovascular system is working really hard to deliver that oxygen. So this is actually, I'll just pause it here, this is actually, if we talk about functional threshold power and power meters, we're not actually at this athlete's functional threshold power in inverted commas. And this is where output is limited because, if we just had the power meter and used functional threshold power, we would always training on that number and all these zones, but actually this athlete has hit an area of interest before his agreed functional threshold power. So we wouldn't know this without this test, and we wouldn't be able to make some unique interventions and improve performance if we were using performance alone. So just wanted to make a point there. So the test, if we look down at Moxie data, particularly in this muscle here, getting critical low, down to 30%. Not so that's an important point there. You've noticed that this muscle here now is actually getting into a more oxygen reduced state than the other leg muscle. So this is where we start to see, what might be the problem here. Is this athlete perhaps using one muscle more than the other in the leg? Is it a technique problem? Is it a strength problem? We haven't, we'll talk about in later webinars in detail. This is where if you just use the data alone from the mask, you wouldn't get this individual data down at the local level of how these muscles are interacting. And in later webinars, when we use the EMG, we will start to see how much force is produced in each muscle, and this is how we can start to see actually, this athlete has got a problem locally in that muscle in the leg, or a muscular coordination problem. So this is why the athlete is limitation, because oxygen levels are getting extremely low in these muscles. So we see this here. We've just asked the athlete to stop. So you see quite quickly the heart rate top left. It's very high at 169, it's starting to go down very quickly. Okay, and we start to see respiratory rate dropping, and how much air is moving in that. So those systems are doing the opposite now, they're coming back into balance. He doesn't need this really high heart rate, he doesn't need to breathe really fast and deep. And we start to see why when we look at the Moxie data, those legs have stopped moving, and look now at the oxygen saturation in those legs, way higher, 80%, 88% and 82%. So this is the reason why the athlete's heart rate is dropping really quickly, and he's having his breathing is becoming much more controlled. So historically we would just have green in front of us and nothing else. Now we have all our wearable technology, and we've attached it to his legs. We can see what's happening in each muscle, which tells us the story behind the data on this screen. So this is how combining all this information to this test is really, you know, gain some new insights into the physiology of athletes and quite specifically what their problem is. So we go away and this athlete went on to do more of these loads, and it was early on in the test here that actually he actually hit his limitation, and then he went away and analysed that and found out what his problem was. And I'll just leave it with this assessment result. So it's not, I've really sort of dumbed this down. We graph many more things in this. But this is basically his oxygen levels in one of his muscles. So we can see if we just keep it fairly simple for today, these spikes here would be the times when he rested between those intervals, and the line in between is the oxygen level during the 5-minute interval. So we see in the early phase this sort of trend of increasing oxygen. So in these intensities lower down, you know, we had more oxygen coming in than we needed. So we had this balance, absolutely no problem. So this is a normal response. As the athlete starts to get to the point where he's struggling to maintain that balance, that team of 4 has suddenly hit one of them suddenly become the weak link and hit the limitation. And this is the area we look for here, where we sort of hit this balanced state where we don't have an excess of oxygen, and we see this sort of plateau here. So we know at this point here the athlete is struggling to sort of maintain that balance anymore. So this is the point where we need to analyse the data in more detail and decide which of that team of 4 has just hit its limitation. So has this guy got cardiovascular limitation? Is it the respiratory system that's maxing out, or is it a muscular limitation? And then we go beyond that and then further into the testing, and he's got problems now because he's just not able to get the oxygen there quick enough. Well, we know that already because we've gone past this limitation. So this stage is the compensation stage. So the other systems are starting to compensate to keep the athlete going, because if they didn't do that, the test would stop here. So without the compensation, the limitation would be the end of the test. So this is why we can continue to exercise and race and go hard, because we have compensators. And this is the thing that most people make a mistake. They will train and target this area here and actually not even focus on the limiters, because they don't know where this area is, no idea what's limiting their performance. So this is the area we're interested in, not afterwards when we've gone beyond that compensating. So I think hopefully that explains what we're trying to do wrong with all our equipment and out in the field in the lab, and hopefully gives you a taste of where we're going, because I think in future webinars we'll really look at each system and then do some live testing with athletes and just start to show how cardiovascular system can limit performance muscular, because there's many reasons why. And what I wanted to show today really is just the equipment we use and the point where we start to see things going wrong and perhaps the reasons for that. I can't actually hear you there, Norman, sorry.
Apologies, that's me not putting on my my sound back on, so apologies for that. No, thank you very much, Stuart. That was an excellent insight into some new training methods there. I've got a few questions, all right, for you. So the first one is, because you mentioned quite a bit there about functional threshold power and watts and so on, and most training just now is based on setting a level of FTP, setting training zones, having periodization and training based around the intensity and the And does this technology and data you've got, is that going to change that approach, or is that still going to be the basis for training for the foreseeable future?
So yeah, I mean, we we still coach athletes just using power. We coach athletes all over the world. We don't always get them in the lab situation. Um, so yeah, I'm not trying to say those methods aren't effective, and we certainly still use them. But what I am saying is that we certainly aren't hanging around and following everybody else and doing what everybody else is doing with the textbooks. We're embracing this new technology, working really hard to come up with some new innovative ideas, and we're getting some great results. So I would say initially it'll be a combination of the two, because unless you've got some equipment like this to wear out in the field, then we would have to prescribe the training using a power meter or a heart rate anyway. Um, so the gold standard would be we would do an assessment in the lab with all this equipment on, and then the athlete would go and you can purchase these yourself and train with them. And that would be the gold standard, really, training with that device on you, and you getting that direct biofeedback to control the session rather than using the output to control the session. I'll give you a quick example. So I coach a guy who's got both. He's got Moxie and Gallanach, and we used to always do some power based training. So he might do an interval for 15, 20 minutes, 60 minutes at a certain power output, and generally we wouldn't change that power. So we would ask him, maybe I asked him to do an interval for 7 minutes at 250 watts, for example, and that would be the interval. We wouldn't do anything else. Now, what we do now is he does an interval with a Moxie on, and he starts at a certain muscle oxygen saturation, and we try to, for example, maybe try to hold that oxygen saturation. So we don't want it to go up, and we don't want it to go down. We want to keep it steady. So we really target that limiter. So he might have to start at, say, 250 watts, and then after a few minutes, his oxygen level might start to drop. So he needs to just lower his power and bring that oxygen level back up. So he may start at 250, and then he will come down to 220, 230, and then we might see the opposite. The oxygen might start to overshoot, so then he needs to bring his power back up. So he's controlling in session with direct feedback from his muscle, which is, well, that's the future, really, some way off
And it's the theory behind that, Stu, that what you're trying to do is to improve the efficiency of the muscles. So you're trying to get the body to get used to working at a certain level of muscle oxygenation. Is that the thinking behind it?
Well, there's many. That was just one example. I mean, sometimes if the athlete, and this is where we're going into the future webinar, maybe the athlete's got a respiratory limitation, so we would use the Moxie to target the respiratory system, and that really is for, well, some of it's for later webinars, and some of it's top secret if you want it.
So I'm jumping ahead a bit then.
Yeah, we still use heart rate, we still use power, but we also have the ability to do some other amazing things, and it just comes down to what equipment people have got. They come to visit us in the lab, and we can do those things.
So the data that you get from the Moxie monitor, you can link that to your Garmin. Like I've got my Turbo, you can see the heart rate data and the power data and cadence and so on there on Garmin. So you can do the same with the Moxie and control it that way.
Absolutely, yeah. It took some time for for Garmin to pull it all together with the third party apps and things, but yeah, it's just AMP Plus technology. So it basically just sends the data to you to the head unit, and then we get lots of fantastic graphs to analyze. So yeah, say we don't even have to be in the same room now. It's this is what we've been trying to achieve for some time. We want to take the lab out into the field. This equipment, not only do we not even have to, have we got something that is small enough to go out into the field, we don't actually have to be there with the athlete either. So we get all this fantastic physiological data we can analyse.
Okay. Well, I'll not ask any more questions for the risk of getting some secrets out of you that we want them to hold back for future webinars. So that's what we'll do. Thank you very much, Stu, and thank you all very much for joining this webinar. If you want to find out more about Sunsport Velo coaching or Gallanach consulting, please let us know. Our details are up on the screen just now, and you can find out more about us on our respective websites. So thanks again, Stu.
Thanks, Norman. Thanks for